Chances are that you've heard of the infamous Mexican gang, the Sinaloa Cartel, at some point. They're only the most violent criminals in history after all. But did you know that one man was behind most of the gang's criminal activity? In this video, we'll be sharing the story of José Rodrigo Aréchiga Gamboa, aka El Chino Ántrax, who became Sinaloa Cartel's highest-ranking hitman and paid the price for it. Let's get started. José Rodrigo Aréchiga Gamboa was born in Culiacán, Sinaloa, Mexico on the 15th of June 1980. Unlike most hardened criminals we see, Aréchiga had a relatively normal childhood. Almost privileged, in fact. His family was affluent and well respected in the city because his father was a government official, and his mother was an academic and devout housewife. As you can tell, Aréchiga didn't come from a neglectful or abusive household, so there was basically no reason for him to go astray, right? Well, not entirely. You see, little Aréchiga had some very shady neighbors when he was a kid. He lived right next door to the infamous Zambadas. This might not make much sense at this point, but you'll see how the Zambadas play a massive role in Aréchiga's life. If you're unaware of the name Zambadas, let's break it down for easier understanding. Ismael El Mayo Zambada is a suspected Mexican drug lord and alleged leader of the Sinaloa Cartel, who formed the cartel with 3 other like-minded criminals back in 1987. In fact, El Mayo led his very own faction when El Chapo was still active and thriving. Most people haven't heard about El Mayo because he'd always been content with running his show from the shadows, while El Chapo had a flair for dramatics and public displays, and a desire for the spotlight. Now, let's get back to the tale of Aréchiga's corruption. El Mayo Zambada had 3 sons, namely Vicente Zambada Niebla, alias El Vicentillo, Ismael Zambada Imperial, alias Mayito Gordo, and Serafin Zambada Ortiz, alias Serra. Aréchiga grew up around these 3 boys as they were the same age. They spent a lot of time together, which obviously didn't bode well for the young Aréchiga. Obviously, we have no way of knowing how much influence the Zambada boys had on a gullible Aréchiga, but we can say that El Mayo definitely did not shield any of his sons from his less than savory cartel business. Surprisingly, Aréchiga didn't show any inclination toward a life of crime when he was young, which makes his subsequent activities all the more shocking. As a young man, Aréchiga tried to become a pilot in the Mexican military. Unfortunately, he failed the physical exam just because he had a persistent skin condition. No kidding, this guy could have avoided a life of crime if only he hadn't been rejected based on his skin. How crazy is that? Anyway, Aréchiga then tried to go for something else. This time he chose to focus on a degree in architecture in college. Then 2 things happened in quick succession that completely changed his life. And not precisely for the best, to be quite honest. First off, he had a daughter. Secondly, he had to get married. To cut a long story short, young Aréchiga was forced to drop out of college due to his new responsibilities. And that's when life took a turn for the worst for Aréchiga and his future victims, as you'll see later on. In utter desperation, the young man turned to his childhood friends, the Zambada brothers. Remember when we said Aréchiga Gamboa had a close relationship with the Zambada family, having grown up with El Mayo's sons in Culiacán? Well, as it turns out, this friendship got him a one-way ticket straight into the most ruthless cartel in the country, the Sinaloa Cartel. Before we get into Aréchiga's initiation into the cartel, let's take a brief look at the gang itself. The Sinaloa Cartel is basically an alliance of some of Mexico's top capos, founded by Joaquín Guzmán Loera, Héctor Palma Salazar, Ismael Zambada Garcia, and Juan José Esparragosa Moreno in 1987. As one of the West's largest and most powerful drug trafficking organizations, the cartel is often in the news for its many exploits, turf wars, and high-profile arrests. Its criminal activities include drug trafficking, fentanyl manufacturing, money laundering, weapons trafficking, people smuggling, murder, kidnapping, and bribery. The gang avoids legal repercussions because it has connections with the federal police and military that protect them and help them beat their rivals. In short, the Sinaloa Cartel has killed thousands of innocent citizens and made the lives of thousands of Mexicans unbearable. Anyway, back to Aréchiga. After dropping out of school, he started to go through his options and came up short. To survive, he knew he had to do something drastic, so he did exactly that. Aréchiga talked to his old friend, Vicente Zambada Niebla, aka El Vincentillo, who instantly introduced him to his father's cartel business. At first, Aréchiga was assigned menial and lowly tasks, such as running small errands, driving shipments, and supervising goods to their destinations. In no time, the young man had made a name for himself for being extremely efficient and hardworking. Now it was time to promote him. Soon enough, El Vincentillo realized Aréchiga's potential and decided to make him more than a foot soldier. Aréchiga was then promoted to an active participant in the cartel's drug trade. It was during this time that Aréchiga finally came into his own. His creative and cunning mind earned him the respect and admiration of the Zambadas when he hatched the perfect plan to get shipments across the border into the American territory. He devised a method to ship cocaine and marijuana across the border without getting caught by creating an entire network of legitimate businesses. These so-called legal trucking companies were able to deliver the shipments from Mexico to America because he made it so that the trucks could get across the border since they had all the necessary paperwork. He literally duped the Border Patrol, who had no idea that tons and tons of drugs were being shipped right under their noses in each truck. What a genius! Due to this fail-proof hack, Aréchiga instantly jumped ranks overnight and came under the spotlight because of his ingenious plan. Soon he'd caught the attention of the eldest Zambada, El Mayo, who took a liking to this new mastermind in his cartel. With this newfound attention from the boss himself, Aréchiga found himself mired in even more criminal activities. It was at this point that he started to show his true colors. Perhaps he'd always been bloodthirsty and remorseless, or maybe living in a cartel changed him. But soon enough, Aréchiga started participating in some of the cartel's deadliest activities. Something in him snapped, and he started volunteering for the cartel's grisly stuff, such as assassinations. Over time, Aréchiga gained an unquenchable thirst for blood and was willing to murder as many people as it took to satiate it. But it seems that it was a never-ending desire because Aréchiga turned into a fearsome urban legend in Mexico. His name started to appear on public bridges, where the mutilated bodies of the cartel's rivals were strung up under cautionary banners for all to see. It was synonymous with blood, murder, mutilation, and unimaginable torture. Aréchiga became El Chino Ántrax. Rumors started to fly that anyone unlucky enough to die at the hands of El Chino would continue to suffer terribly in the afterlife because of the horrors he unleashed on their bodies. Of course, El Mayo saw this as a golden opportunity to spread more fear and hate amongst his rivals. The boss capitalized on El Chino's penchant for extreme violence and added him to his arsenal of notorious assassins. Most significantly, he was assigned the task of becoming the personal bodyguard of El Mayo's son, El Vincentillo. However, Aréchiga wasn't simply a mere bodyguard. He was the Sinaloa Cartel's weapon and valuable asset, a literal killing machine with zero conscience. In 2008, Aréchiga was removed from his bodyguard duties and was assigned a far more deadly job. He was allowed to form an armed enforcement group that protected the Sinaloa Cartel leader, Ismael El Mayo Zambada, and his sons, known as the Los Ántrax. Apparently, a civil war was brewing in the Mexican cartel because a small faction of the gang had broken off and formed their rival organization, the Beltran-Leyva Cartel. Aréchiga's job was to snuff out the separatists and protect the Zambadas. The thing is, Beltran-Leyva had a beef with El Chapo, but since El Mayo was caught in the crossfire of the conflict, someone needed to protect the boss and his sons. And who was better suited to do the job than Aréchiga, a violent hitman with close ties to the family? The Los Ántrax were given signature rings that identified them as part of Aréchiga's squadron. As for the man himself, he became known as El Chino Ántrax. Aréchiga and his army of assassins protected the Zambadas and waged war on anyone who dared to oppose them. As the years went by, El Chino became a monster, unleashing absolute terror and mayhem across Mexico. During this time, he developed an obsession with social media. As you'll see, this desire for the spotlight actually became his downfall. Known for his luxurious lifestyle, El Chino Ántrax loved to display his money and flamboyant life by posting pictures of his sports cars, yachts, weapons, jewelry, money, and extravagant parties with famous narco-corrido bands. He basically became a social media influencer, taking care to blur out his face to evade the authorities so they wouldn't identify him. Unfortunately, El Chino had severely underestimated the observation skills of the security agencies. You see, El Chino would always wear a very recognizable skull ring in all of his pictures. It was a total giveaway, and it didn't take law enforcement long to pick up on it. Aréchiga Gamboa, aka El Chino, was arrested at Amsterdam's Schiphol airport on an Interpol warrant in December 2013 and extradited to the United States in July of 2014. At first, he stubbornly refused any charges levied against him, but then he did a complete turn. In May 2015, he pleaded guilty to conspiracy to import cocaine and marijuana into the United States, admitting that he'd been a direct participant in acts and threats of violence by the Sinaloa Cartel. In a short time, Aréchiga coughed up all the secrets of the cartel that he had helped run as a ruthless drug lord. During that time, he basically snitched on everyone. In retrospect, that was probably the dumbest thing he could do. In December 2019, Aréchiga was sentenced to a very light sentence of 7 years and 3 months in prison, including time served. He was released under supervision, according to court documents. Then on March 3, 2020, Aréchiga Gamboa was reported missing by his residence parole officer. That's when things went downhill for him, for the last time. El Chino returned to Culiacan to live with his sister and her husband in May of 2020, but their reunion was cut short. On the night of May 14, 2020, Aréchiga, his sister, and her husband were visited by a hit squad. A fierce firefight later, the three were taken hostage by the armed men. The next day, a black SUV with 3 dead bodies inside, including El Chino's, was discovered by the police in the town of Ayune, Sinaloa. The notorious hitman was shot dead. The other 2 bodies were identified as his sister and his brother-in-law. Although no one knows for sure who murdered El Chino Ántrax, it's suspected that the Sinaloa Cartel hadn't taken kindly to one of their own selling them out to the feds. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more videos and hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed today's video.